Hi, welcome to Normal People Stories, a podcast where I have simple conversation with normal people I meet. In our talks, we reflect about who we are, what we feel, and how we experience the world. My name is Ines Pusa, and today with me I have Nikolaj.
Woohoo! Hello,
Thank you
Ines.
for being here.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me.
Can you start by telling us maybe your name, your age, and where you come from?
Yes. My name is Nikolaj Andrei Salström. Nikolaj, I think, is originally a sort of Russian name or sort of in that direction. I also have a sister called Katrina, which is also kind of a Russian name. I don't know if my family has any Russian family members, but we do have Eastern European family members. So, for example, my grandmother was Polish. She was a circus artist.
Ooh.
And she met my grandfather, who was Swedish, in the circus. So my family is a little bit from sort of all over the place, which might be the reason why I have this name, Nikolaj Andrei Salström, because Salström is a Swedish last name. I was born in Denmark, actually quite close to where we are now, in a small town called Hornbæk, which is a little bit north of here. And I was born on September 10, 1979. That's 45 years ago. Very long time ago.
Thank you so much. I have a very short question, but it's also a very big one for you. I'm very curious. Nikolaj, what do you believe in?
I believe in the good of mankind. That is the answer that sort of comes to me right away. Which might sound strange, because if you look at the history of humankind, and if you look at what the world looks like today, even if you think about people that you sort of know from your home country or maybe the city you live in, there might be all sorts of reasons why we would not want to believe in the good of mankind, humankind, because there are all sorts of maybe signs that we are not particularly good as living beings. But I think that is because every living being, every living organism goes through some kind of process of development, I suppose you can call it. I think that's something all of us can see very clearly, that a living organism like a human being goes through a development from being a tiny little fetus and then a baby and then a child and a teenager. So it's pretty obvious that some form of at least change takes place in a human being, and so does for all other living beings and living organisms. Some people think that that process only takes place within one lifetime. I personally find that hard to believe. So I'm quite a firm believer that all of us have been here many, many times before. So it's a process of sort of gradual development that might take place over many, many, many lifetimes, that eventually and gradually gets each living being closer and closer and closer to the core of who they are, which, in my belief, is something very beautiful and very good. So the reason why we might look at the history of the world and look at the world we see now and say, it doesn't look like it's habitated by good living beings, I would say, it's because we're in a process. We're getting there. And I think even, I'm not an expert on this, but even if you sort of ask historians about the development of our societies and the world we live in, it's true that there is still, unfortunately, a lot of war and conflicts and different forms of oppression taking place in the world that we live in now. But if you go back 1,000 years or 2,000 years, it was much, much worse. So we are actually moving in a direction of things getting better and more human beings primarily sort of getting closer and closer to the good that is inside all of us.
Thank you for sharing. And so you're a teacher here at the International People's College, and one of the topic you teach is Mind the Heart. So kind of a class where we learn about mindfulness, and we are curious about spirituality, and it's also a part of your life.
Yes.
What does it look like, and what does it feel like? That you have this whole other world that we don't see that is also part of your life.
I think spirituality for me, maybe the word or the concept spirituality has different meanings to different people. And sometimes when I meet people who say, hello, my name is so-and-so, and I'm a very spiritual person, then they talk about things which to me sound very, very strange. And maybe what they talk about is true, but it's not necessarily something that I have any experience with. So for me, spirituality is basically just the idea that we living beings are more than just the physical bones and blood and chemical processes that take place. Like, it's, for me, quite obvious that there is more to a human being, there's more to human life than just these chemical processes, electrochemical process taking place in the brain and in the body. There is indeed consciousness and free will, and these things, I believe, transcend the physical aspect of our beings. They are not a result of the physical aspect of our being. They transcend, they go beyond the physical aspect of our being, which then I think traditionally has been given the name spirituality, that there is something beyond the world of the purely physical forms. And that, for me, is something that I've been very interested in since I was fairly young. I think at the age of 16 or 17, I started becoming interested in these things. And I think actually one of the reasons why I became interested in these things is because I come from a family that is not at all very spiritual, where I remember very vividly one day, I don't remember exactly how old I was. I was maybe a teenager, and my dad told me sort of the belief in God is as crazy as believing in Santa Claus. Like, yeah, everybody knows Santa Claus does not exist. The same, everybody should kind of know that God doesn't exist. And for me, I think that was actually quite helpful on my sort of path of spirituality, because it gave me something to push against, because my dad basically at least hinted at the idea that a human being is nothing more than just the pure material that we are made of, which to me in so many ways and on so many levels just sounded not right, and on so many levels did not resonate with my own feeling of what does it mean to be a human being. So this is something that I think I've been exploring most of my adult life, and the way that spirituality plays a role in my life is in the relationship I have with other living beings, whether they are human beings or they belong to what we call the animal realm or the plant realm or whatever. I imagine that at least potentially, if your belief is that a human being is nothing more than the physical aspect, of their being, and the same with beings in the animal realm and so on, then it might be possible to look at those other living beings and not be deeply moved by them. But for me, that is not possible. I cannot be with another human being without just being, wow, it's fantastic. You are a human being. Or another living being. For me, it's just the most amazing things that we exist, and that we exist as more, in my opinion, than just this physical form. And of course, it means sometimes I'm together with people where I, on one level, find that they are totally annoying and really, really like, part of me are not necessarily big fan of how they express themselves in this world. How do they talk, and how do they act, and how do they interact? So there can certainly be that on one hand, but on the other hand, there is still the feeling, wow, you're a human being. It's such a crazy thing. Yeah. And maybe you haven't really realized yet what it means to be a human being. But okay, that's quite normal. Again, I mean, all living beings go through different processes, right, of transformation, or in some cultures you would call it sort of awakening and enlightenment. So the same way, you cannot blame a newborn baby for not being able to walk yet, because no newborn baby can walk. The same way, some people who are still sort of not spiritually so mature yet, so developed, they might from time to time act and interact with the world in ways where you go, oh, fuck, this is so dumb. But it's difficult really to have anything but understanding of the fact that, yes, these are processes that all of us go through. Yeah.
Thank you. And how, when you're aware of this and sensitive to this, how do you go on with everyday life where it feels like most things in our society, the society we live in, at least here today, is not aware or not sensitive to this, or doesn't show sensitivity to this, like when we work, or when, like, entertainment, work, even relationship with people, at least how we see it. How do you practice and remind yourself of this? Because it's not, at least it's something we lose at some point, and we have to come back to it. Like you said, when you were young, it's at some point you had this curiosity and you've explored it. But how, what does it look like? This?
Yeah, so I suppose part of my life story is that I spent big parts of my adulthood being away from modern Western culture, in the sense that I spent how many, I don't know, maybe 15 years or so, being in Denmark primarily for some months of the year, maybe 6 months of the year, where I would earn some money and save some money. And then the remaining part of the year, maybe another 5-6 months or more, I would go traveling to other parts of the world. And often when I went traveling to other parts of the world, I would go to places where the spiritual traditions are quite strong, and they're quite an integrated part of the culture and in people's everyday lives and in how they interact with each other. And there's no doubt for me that in some of those cultures that I visited, if I went, for example, to stay in a monastery and I was surrounded by monks and nuns and lamas and yogis and so on one level I would find myself being very much at home, because it's like these people, they speak sort of my language, and we see eye to eye when it comes to many, many different things. And that has been very helpful for me to find something where I feel, oh, I'm quite home in this culture. I feel at home. And then the first many, many years of living like this, often when I would then come back to Denmark or come back to sort of modern, Western, very, very materialistic societies, I would feel very much like a stranger, like, part of me, of course, feels at home because this is the part of the world where I was born and raised. But another part of me does not feel at home at all because there is this focus on material gain, and there's the focus on status and wealth and money and consumerism and these things, which to me just like, fucking hell, haven't we moved past that yet? But then I think what eventually started happening for me was that the same way that when I was younger, I would often feel I've been born into the wrong time. Like I should have been alive in the 60s and 70s or something like that. Or I should have been born at some point in the future, maybe. Eventually coming to an understanding that, no, this is actually the right time for me. The same way I've often had the feeling I've been born into the wrong part of the world. I don't at all belong here. Again, gradually starting to feel more and more that, no, this is actually not only the right time, but also the right place for me to be, because I am fortunate and privileged enough to be in a part of the world at a particular time when I have for sure materialistic safety. I mean, I'm not at all a rich person, but I have a roof over my head and I have food every day and clothes to wear. I don't have to worry about these kind of things, which can be a challenge if you live in some cultures where there's a very direct access to the spiritual dimension of your being, but at the same time, you are very, very poor. You are almost like a yogic practitioner who is at the same time a beggar, a homeless beggar on the street, right? So not being able to have to worry about these things, and also at the same time being privileged enough that I live in a time where I have access to these spiritual traditions, to all their teachings and so on. Like if we only go back maybe a generation or two, if I had been alive during my grandparents' time, for example, I wouldn't have had basically any chance to know anything about spiritual practices other than maybe that particular form of Christianity, which was being practiced in their local church at their time. Now I see that I have so many almost endless opportunities of exploring and understanding, hopefully, many, many different spiritual traditions around the world and their practices and sort of the insights that I feel they give. So it feels like now I'm starting to feel more and more at home in this particular culture, which to me still feels very strange and alien to me, but at the same time feels right. And this particular time, which on one hand feels very alien and strange to me, but also feels very right to me.
Yeah. It sounds like all of this reflection is part of this journey you've been on, and you said spirituality is a journey you've started. And I'm curious, what do you know where you're going? Like, do you have a direction? Is there something you're seeking? You mentioned like some people seek enlightenment. Is there something you're seeking?
There probably is. I think, at least on one level, what I'm trying to sort of arrive at more and more is being quite a normal person who lives quite a normal life. Maybe fitting with the podcast title here, like where up until a few years ago, my lifestyle was quite different from that of most people. Like, again, only being in Denmark for some months or half a year at the time, only working part-time during that fairly short time, and really living with very, very low income. I mean, many people, sort of in my Danish network of friends and family, when they hear about the very, very low amount of money that I could live for in the past, they are almost like shocked. How is that even possible? So now arriving more and more at, in many ways, living much more of like a normal life, right? I wake up in the morning, I have my morning coffee, I go to work, I have a 9 to 5 kind of job, and these kind of things that sort of most, I suppose, normal people do. So there is certainly something there which already now I feel like I'm arriving at, and I'm sure there are other things that I would like to sort of eventually also feel like I'm getting at, but I don't. It's not like I have a great master plan, really, like step 1, 2, 3, and then eventually go somewhere. There's no doubt that sort of some of the next big steps or challenges for me will be in relation to the loss of family members that are close to me. So the obvious example would be my parents, who are getting older, right? And we all know that none of us will live forever. And one day, yes, you will have to say goodbye to people that you are close to. And that is certainly something that is very much on my mind now. Like, they could be here for another 10 or 20 or, hypothetically speaking, 30 years. Probably they won't. And what is that actually going to be like? Sort of that phase of your life, which for sure is a big sort of rite of passage when you are here without your parents. Like, you really are without those who brought you into this world. And hopefully being able to be at peace with that myself, but hopefully, maybe even more importantly, being able to be with my parents in such a way that they also find peace with it, as they enter into sort of their last phase of life.
And what would peace feel like for you?
Yeah, it's a good question. So at IPC, we talk a lot about peace, right? Because it is a peace-building school. And for me, this is one of the most beautiful things about IPC. This is, I think, the primary reason why initially when I came to IPC, I was drawn to IPC. When I came to IPC, I didn't know so much about the values and the history of IPC and the philosophy. But when I found out that at the core, IPC is really a peace-building school, that really struck a nerve in me, and struck a chord in me, and so we talk a lot about peace, and I suppose peace is something that can manifest of many different levels of our being. So if we take the world we live in, it's quite obvious, I think, that something like moving towards a world without war, certainly, yes, is not only a step towards peace, but also a step in the right direction. This is quite obvious, right? A world where we move in the direction of less and less oppression of people, So obviously, peace is not only the absence of war, where we shoot rockets and missiles at each other. It's also very much about how we interact with each other, like being able to see another living being who might have the same or different skin color than yourself, the same eye or different eye color than yourself, the same or different background than yourself, etc., and still basically feel, wow, this is my brother or sister I'm looking at. So there is, as I see, those aspects of peace, right? Globally speaking, and between human beings, and then there is a peace that sort of resides inside each living being, which I suppose can be difficult to explain if people feel they have never experienced it before. But it is, I suppose, something about a peace where you look at the state of things, the world at large, and your particular life. And although you see there are many challenges here, there are many things that are heavy, and there are many things that are painful, still everything is in order. Things are the way they are supposed to be. And there is sort of a higher meaning to why we experience these things. It's not because there's a... it's not because it's a fluke in the system. It's not because there's an error. It's actually the way things are is the way they're supposed to be, in order for us to arrive eventually at where we're supposed to be.
Thank you. I want to ask you also about another part of your life, which is teaching.
Yes.
I had the privilege of being in your classroom a few years ago, and now I have friends who are in your classroom today. And we all feel that there's something very unique about your teaching style and very memorable and holistic. And I'm curious, what is your approach to teaching? What does it mean for you to be a teacher? What do you want to bring in your classroom?
That's a good question. I don't have the background as a teacher as such. I'm not trained to be a teacher. I have a background of being a social educator, which means that I'm trained to work with people who have, for example, challenges of mental health or challenges of drug addictions or homelessness and these kind of things. And with that type of work, the most important thing is the relationship that you create with other people. And I'm pretty sure that at least to some degree, I bring that into the classroom. So I'm not like necessarily extremely knowledgeable about particular subjects the way that people might be if they have a master's degree or PhD from university in various areas. I don't necessarily have that, but I do have the deep desire, the deep wish for my students to look at and maybe experience the world in some ways that they have not necessarily tried before. And I know that as a teacher, that's a possibility you have, especially when you're a teacher at a folk high school, right? Because to a very, very large degree, we sort of create our own classroom, right? We create our own curriculum. We decide which topics we want to deal with. And for me, also very importantly, we decide how we want to deal with these topics. So we can, of course, do more sort of traditional lecture-based style of teaching, which can be very useful for certain things. But we are also allowed to basically do whatever we can think of that we think could help, create some kind of learning space or some kind of space where we can look at the different topics that I as a teacher place in that space of learning, or the myself and the students place in that space of learning. So I have a great love of poetry, for example. So I really like to use poetry in my classes. I have a great love for drama and performances, and I really, really love to include that also. I have a great love for music and other art forms, and I suppose in most of my classes, I do always or almost always have some element of like more traditional lecture-based teachings. But I also know that for me personally, it just becomes a little bit boring to do that the whole time. And so, at least in order to entertain myself, I want to do other things than just that. And then I also think, so because I've been teaching for quite some time now, 2008 was the first year I started teaching. I think sometimes what you find out as a teacher, especially at a folk high school, where you realize, oh, I'm actually very free to do many, many different things. As a result, for me at least, that means that almost every single term I want to try out some new things. And sometimes the things I try out, it's just like a complete failure. It's like, oh my God, this doesn't work at all. And it was just like, it was some kind of extremely embarrassing moment for me and the students, and it just completely didn't work. And I kind of feel, that's okay. At least we tried it. I felt like giving it a try, and it didn't work. And then there are other times, right, when it's like, okay, we tried this out. And I have the feeling it worked quite well. Like I could see in the eyes of the students, they were awake and they were really on to whatever it was we were doing, right? So I think for me, sort of realizing that as a folk high school teacher, we are privileged enough that we are allowed to try out many, many different things. And if things don't work, it doesn't necessarily mean that it was a bad thing that you tried it out. It just means, okay, now you know that that particular thing, at least in that particular context, was maybe not the right thing to do. Then you try something else, right?
That's nice. Yeah. That's my dream job.
Yeah, come back soon then.
I will. I have one last question. So you said you've traveled a lot, you've met lots of people, experienced different things to feed your journey and your curiosity. What is, if you can choose one lesson you have learned that you wish you could teach or how to say, offer to as many people as you can?
Yeah. It would probably be some teachings and some insights that are related to ethics. So when I teach my Mind the Heart class, I do have at least one class where we talk about ethics, and my experience is that most people, when they come to IPC, whether you've attended a school in the East or West or whatever, almost everybody knows something about ethics. It's like a existential and philosophical concept that everybody has been in touch with. But for me, the really, really important thing is the moment when ethics is not something that is just sort of alive in your mind as like a concept or a philosophical concept that you can understand, but something that becomes integrated into your being. And I also think the sort of if we talk about these various spiritual traditions and the methods they have for sort of helping you grow on your journey and move along on your journey, then the tools that relate to ethics, I think, are the most powerful tools of them all, because they are tools that are at play every single moment of your waking life when you are around other living beings. So how do you treat other living beings? And I remember I spent a couple of months, I've done that on a number of occasions at a monastery in the outskirts of Kathmandu in Nepal. And I was attending a retreat that was both a meditation retreat and a teaching retreat, where ethics was essentially sort of the overall theme that was being discussed. And on the very, very last day of that course, the nun that was leading the course, she sort of wrapped things up by saying, okay, now for the past 2 months, we've talked about all these different aspects of ethics and how we relate to each other, and some of the teachings being like very, very esoteric teachings and sometimes maybe difficult to understand. But really, really, if you want to wrap it up and sort of bring it into a form of a concentration, this is what it's all about, then it's whenever possible, do no harm. And whenever possible, do good. It's really as simple as that. And I think most of us are not necessarily aware of like the potential we have of doing harm to other people, because obviously we're not just talking about your fist landing in the face of another person. It's also about how we talk to each other. It's about the kind of sort of energies and vibrations that emanate from us towards other beings. So that sort of capacity, innate capacity of actually causing harm for other people, not everyone at least is aware of that, but also the other way around, that capacity we have of actually bringing good into this world. And sometimes it's like really, really small things that we do for each other, where the other person just goes, wow, that was so nice that you sent me that smile, or you held the door, or you asked me how am I doing, and you actually cared about my answer. And like fairly small things in a way. I think that's the most important thing. Do no harm, and if possible, help do good.
Thank you so much, Nikolaj. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I wish we could speak for hours, but already thank you so much for your generosity and everything. Thank you.
You're
and for
welcome.
being here.
Thank you for asking.